Okay, well, let's get started. These things we usually sort of feel our way into them. These topics were self-generated by David's, what the community might be interested in talking about. And he and I sort of cooked it up together. And the guiding notion this evening. Oh, here's Paul. Hey, haven't seen you around. Did you just get back? Last night. Yeah, like a lot of other people. It was a wild night.
That's going to be really good.
Oh, great, Paul.
Lock the front door so people won't be coming in and out.
Okay.
This door, don't walk through it. You think you want to go through there, instead go around to the other one.
That was very helpful. David, did you want to introduce the theme?
Yeah.
Good. Do it.
I actually made a few notes. I suggested the idea of talking about insanity. It has a lot of personal meaning to me, aside from the value I thought it would have for the group. And I thought I was thinking about why do I want to talk about this to begin with? And for me, there's a way that I have this continual desire to somehow create an environment that somehow really is safer for myself. Somehow, some way that I can feel that the way that I express myself will somehow not result in me being ostracized or in some way otherwise sort of bottled up and packaged and sent off somewhere. I have this fear of what I'll call insanity. And I feel that this is something that really affects everyone in most of their daily life. I think it does mine at some subtle levels that we don't acknowledge enough. So I'd like to talk about sort of what it is to begin with. What is it? What is insanity? What is this fear that I have about crossing a line at which point I would be really ultimately somehow ostracized in some way, and how that stops me from growing in general. So I have this desire somehow to kind of expand my own awareness, other people's awareness enough to allow, so that it would allow more for myself, and that I would feel in some way more free to explore areas that are frightening to me otherwise to explore. And I wanted to mention a personal example for me. About 2 years ago, for those fortunate or unfortunate enough to find me, I could be seen in the garden at Esalen talking about God in a rapturous way. One of my fears of Arnie Mandel was here about a year ago or so, and he asked in one of our processes, he asked us to go around the room sort of and actually to pair up and tell our partner if we were to go crazy, what form would it take? And my idea was of being a religious fanatic in some way. I have this thing, among other things, that there are areas that I've sort of experienced for myself, and for me it's been through drugs, mild drugs I might add, where I've seen things that I've shut off and have felt in some way I haven't been able to integrate into my ordinary life. And I have this fear that for me to explore that area further might result in me not only walking through the garden talking about God, but I might be discovered. I was lucky; not too many people saw me that day. And I think that there's something in general taboo about behavior. This is obvious about behavior that just isn't norm enough. But what I'm struck by is how low the threshold is for myself as well to tolerate behavior that isn't ordinary enough. I mean, I'm very quick to say so and so is weird, or so and so is off, and this is part and parcel for myself. This judgment that I have of other people with the problem I'm sure that I have with allowing myself to be not ordinary. So I think, there's a lot of issues to talk about when we talk about insanity. From what I've said, there's a lot of ways to go. I could say more about what I've said. I'm really interested in other people's experiences, where they felt that those of you that are afraid of going crazy in any way, what that means to you. I find, as I'm talking about it now, I feel vulnerable even, talking about this experience, which I be open to going more into detail about, but by way of introduction, that's sort of where I'm at with the issue. I'm trying to find ways to allow more for myself and not be afraid of that if I explore too much, that it'll be too much, that I'll be, ostracized. I think the whole word taboo is relevant, and I'd like to talk more about that, for that to come up for people, what their idea of taboo is, and how maybe that relates to insanity. It's like there's also this distinction between if I'm onto something that's real, that's far out, that's weird, that's somehow the difference between creative genius and being a fool or being crazy or being pathological. That's a haunting thing. It's like, in either case, if I were onto something that was real, that maybe could be useful to other people, I still might be vulnerable to being called crazy, and maybe I have fear of being destroyed by that or something. And then I have the fear of that I'm wacko, that I'm not on anything that has any relevance to anybody else, and that it's totally my own trip, and I would be more what the kind of person that I look at and I say, oh, that guy's that guy's got a loose screw, or that guy's off the wall. And so, but in either case, I'm looking to find a way to have permission to be either of those things, either the fool or, or onto something that's maybe useful for other people, and how in either case to reckon with my fear about being ostracized.
Yeah, well, I mean, I sort of think along these lines, although a little differently. 3 times you used the word ostracized. What I'm always afraid of is that I'll be ostracized, except that it'll be entirely deserved. In other words, that going off the deep end into some kind of appropriate behavior. The word that I would use over and over again is disgrace, that it would disgrace everything. And and it's gotten weird for me because there used to be nothing to disgrace because there was no reputation. Now I'm always aware that, if I go bananas, then people will say, what happened to that guy? You think this is good? You read these books? Did you hear how this guy ended up? So then it's all ruined. It's like they're saying about Woody Allen, his entire work must now be reassessed. And you think, oh God, what if that were me? Your entire work needs to be reassessed. And it's interesting to think about madness, or what we're calling madness. I mean, the religious thing is the one that overcomes me or overcame me. That's how I imagine I would go. And even as it is, I'm practically a repent, the end is nigh person. I mean, it's all couched in, we have the computer and the mathematics and the dazzling, rhetoric, but it's basically the end is nigh rap of some sort. And yet I'm very intolerant intellectually. I mean, there are perfectly harmless, functioning people that I, in my own mind, consider crazy simply because of what they believe. I mean, one way of thinking about crazy is it's just you have looser rules of evidence than the rest of us. So, and in a society falling to pieces like ours, where nobody has a very firm grip on what's going on, if you're nuts, but you're not sure you're nuts, you just have to get 10 people to believe you, and suddenly you're a method, a school, a point of view. You're not nuts anymore. You're invited to teach your insanity and show others the way. But I think there's an unmistakable threshold that I think people who are insane in the way that you're concerned about and that I'm concerned about know it. It's not something, and I think Dick was the great exemplar in this area. I mean, he was nuts and he knew it. And he managed it and worked with it and got juice out of it and was sometimes overwhelmed by it. Because it's a feeling, don't you think? That it transcends intellectualizing. One can believe all kinds of odd things, but there's a certain existential intensity that overcomes you, and then you are crazy or insane because it's almost like with psychedelics or practices that are very powerful, you do begin to rise through some kind of spiritual domain. But if you're unbalanced slightly to one side or the other, you'll start to skew, and it'll get worse and worse, and it will feed back negatively into your life. And insanity is a kind of like a divine madness of some sort. I mean, it's not clear what it is exactly. I mean, I think people really do touch extraordinary states. I'm not a psychotherapist, so I haven't seen like hundreds of people who were diagnosed as mad. But these people who go off the deep end with religious ideas and so forth, it seems to me there's more going on than a disintegrating psychology, because it's always accompanied by events in the real world which reinforce the crazy assumption. It's like, from the point of view of the person who is undergoing this, there's ample evidence always at hand that they're not crazy, that this is really happening. I remember when I was at my most unreclaimable, one of the things I would do, it was in the Amazon, and very fortunately, because modern mental health care delivery systems couldn't reach me, and so I survived it, but otherwise I doubt that I would have, because when they drug you and interrupt these cycles of whatever this is, then it's very hard to ever get straight again. But the form that my madness would take, on one level, was I would go alone into the jungle, and I could call butterflies to me, which was a strange thing because I had earlier made my living as a butterfly collector. And so I would just, like St. Francis, I would go out and hold up my hands, and the butterflies would come and descend and walk on my hands, and I would oh yes, no, this happened. Nobody was there but me, and we can even create an explanation that I was able to generate an odor or something that brought them in. But so then I would have like an epiphany. It would prove to me my divine nature and my divine mission and so forth and so on. And so then I would sink to my knees, the butterflies surrounding me, and weep with the ecstasy that I had been granted this sign, and then weep a little more, but then the mind would begin to wander, and then I would think about how, but nobody else is getting the benefit of this miracle. And so then I would dry my tears and go look for somebody to show this to. And then I would take these people who were by now fairly concerned about my state of mind anyway, and I would insist that they walk with me into the jungle, and then I would hold out my arms to the skies, expecting butterflies to descend and envelop me, and of course nothing would happen. And then people would just turn away, aghast at such a display of hubris, ego, fucked up, delusory, just that you'd lost it, you would become unbearable, egomaniacal. And then you say, but no, listen, it's really true. And then it's even more pathetic. And so there are, cycles of distancing that go on. I don't know. I think in the course of a life lived to its fullest, most people have pass through these places on some level or another. Is that generally agreed upon? Is this totally wild territory to everybody here, or no? No, it's pretty, yeah.
But I'm raising the issue of leaving, not exactly passing through, but, for myself, leaving something unresolved that still needs to be integrated. And I imagine you have this with places that you've been to, Terence, where there's, in some way, it's not resolved, and to go. And my fear is to explore too much is a ticket to a crazy farm of some kind.
Well, leaving consensus. I think it's true that, with psychedelics, the practice works too well almost, in that it will, if you insist on, I don't want to use the word abusing it, but if you insist on using psychedelics frequently at high doses, back to back, you will unlock your way into a set of assumptions and perceptions and feelings that not very many people can follow you into. And then the question is, have you gone into a spiritual domain, or have you just fallen off the track? And it's hard to tell, and maybe it can happen both ways. It's so hard to convey the mind of the schizophrenic. people who we call crazy do not seem to themselves to be crazy. They look at the world from a different perspective and through a different logic, but they're trying to make sense of it. It's just that the data that they're trying to handle is extremely alien from what the rest of us use. I mean, I can remember when I was in the States that I would, it's so hard to explain, but I would like see waves of historical association out of my past. I mean, it's like I would be in a small town in Colombia, but something would, it would be as though there was another time, a time from my past overlaid over everything. And so a waitress serving me in a restaurant, a hotel keeper, would also be another person in another time, in another place, with a set of associations to me. And I had a friend actually who became schizophrenic and did get electroshock and the whole 9 yards. And he said, what you have to do, what you must do, is learn to shut up. Do not run around. And there's a compulsion to confess as well. This is not easy because there's something about these perceptions that have to be communicated. And yet when you communicate them, people are appalled. They do not know how to handle it. I remember when my brother did what he called turning inside out. And, he didn't know whether he was Agnes or Angus. And there was some intimation of some psychosexual transformation. It wasn't clear whether it was like a transsexual operation or the metamorphosis of an insect or something else. And, he's saying this, I mean, I don't know. I suppose we can multiply these examples endlessly. In thinking about this talk, for me personally, what it comes down to is somehow, and I don't know the how, but the issue is clear, I think. It's an issue of courage and of failure of nerve. You have to be willing to put yourself on the line. And it's all tied into what we always talk about in these circles, which is the ego, and how the ego's final defense against its own dissolution is telling you that you're either going mad or dying. And in the psychedelics, you can usually defeat the dying rap because you just have to have the faith that you're not dying on 15 milligrams of psilocybin. It's highly unlikely, not impossible, but you can argue that it's unlikely. But when it tells you you're going mad, you have nothing to stand on because you can't tell. Who knows? I mean, what is the effective dose of psilocybin for triggering madness? The question doesn't even exist back in the world you left behind. And the only way Shakespeare says, screw your courage to the sticking point. The only way I've found to deal with this is the rough, personally speaking, the absolutely rough, straight ahead way, which is after putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, I finally just say, oh, fuck it, do it, if that's what you want to do, if you want to destroy me, do it. But it requires, it's a kind of recklessness. I can't find a calm place in which to meet it. I can only meet it if I force myself to assume that it's going to leave me high and dry. I remember a psychotherapist who I don't want to name, but who used psychedelics very extensively for years and years and turned on hundreds of people and with combinations and all kinds of stuff. Toward the end of his life, it grew harder and harder and harder for him to take it. And when I asked him why, he said, I always have bad trips. And we talked about it, whether that it was, that just a lifetime of tripping other people had done this, or whether maybe as you pass a certain age, it doesn't do the same thing. It becomes darker and darker, or whether it was something in his personality. I really resist the idea that you could ever get to the place where you say, as some people love to say, psychedelics, I took them, don't need them anymore, learned what it has to offer. But one excuse that I use in my own inner rhetoric is that, sitting here in this moment, I can really strongly imagine what it's like to be stoned on any one of these things. It doesn't feel remote to me anymore. And I don't know whether that's a delusion, an excuse for not doing it, or whether my thresholds are getting lower. I don't know. I was in London a few weeks ago and at a party, and I was the guest of honor, and they brought out last year's Welsh mushrooms and made a big tea for everybody. And the hostess said, it's just almost like a gesture. I mean, there are so many of us and so few mushrooms, but we'll each just get a little bit. Well, so I was first out of the chute, and I don't know whether it all pooled on the top in one place or what was going on, but, I just sat down on the ground, and this guy who said, some person of great reputation who said he'd wanted to meet me for years and years, was sitting in front of me trying to get to know me. And finally he said, you're flaming, aren't you? And I said, yes, I can't carry on this conversation. I just have to hold on to the grass. Well, I don't know what all this means. I don't want to become afraid of it, and I blame myself. I don't think the thing has a negative edge unless you've somehow come out of jiggle with it. And I don't know whether that means, what does it mean if it becomes harder and harder to take these things? Does it mean you're getting out of balance? Does it mean you're just getting older? Where should the blame be put? And then what can you do about it? The only thing I found to do about it is stop running and turn and face it. But each time I do that, it seems to require the very limit of my courage. And I don't know how long one's courage lasts. Maybe it's not a bad thing. I mean, after all, people who climb mountains like Mount Everest, they don't do it till their dying day. At some point, they, knock off and become a consultant for a sportswear manufacturer or something. Well, what does anybody else think about any of this?
I'm getting agitated.
Oh.
I'm getting really agitated because, I don't know even what you're talking about, except that you're talking about having your mushrooms and you're having these experiences. And I've never taken drugs in my life ever. And I've had just normal, or just abnormal, kind of breaks since I was 15. And I'm having these things, and I'm not eating anything, it just comes on. It's very scary for me. And from the time, and David, I really feel for what you were saying, because I'm scared to death. Because since I was like 15 and, in high school, and then they sent me to the hospital, and psychiatrist got hold of me 35 years ago and did a number on me. And, quickly I learned that when the experience comes and that I get scared, I go back to that doctor, and I did that until I came to Esalen 7 years ago. And when I came here, I came to meet Dick and work with him, and asked him to work with me, and he took me under his wing for 6 weeks and worked with me every other day. And what I had then, David, was I had permission to go through it, and he was going to be there with me. And then Dick died. You know, we hiked Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On Monday, he said to me, are you ready to go up here by yourself? Because, pretty soon you have to go alone. And I said, I don't want to go alone. I just want to be with you. And then on Wednesday, he died. And I'm haunted by that because, I keep coming back to Esalen, and they say, well, Dick's dead now. This is not the place for you to go through that. And I said, well, where in the fuck is the place to go? Because there's so many people here that want to go through to this other side. I don't want to do it living in my van on the streets in San Diego. It's not about me telling people my experience. Sometimes the actions look pretty bizarre to the people out on the streets. And I get to the point where then they're alarmed and they call me away. Mm-hmm. Right. And, I'm not walking out telling them that. So it's like, okay, if I'm living away from Esalen, well, even at Esalen now, because last year I was having a break, and I went to jail in the lodge, and I was really scared, and I was reaching out, and she said, well, why don't you go to a movie in town for a few hours and then see, and that was the wrong thing to say, so I terrified and somehow ended up in San Diego in the hospital, got on some new kind of medication, and that's been the pattern too. But when Dick was here and I felt like there was, a support to go through it, that felt okay, and then now when it comes up, I do get scared, and I don't go through it like you just suggested. I go back and, take a drug. And I haven't been on a drug for 10 months now, and I'm back here, and I'm terrified that when it comes up, I'm going to have to run away. I don't feel a support anymore here. And what haunts me is that Dick wanted to have that. That was his dream. I know he's dead and it's not his place anymore. But, his dream was to have a sanctuary where, right down there in that canyon. He talked to me for 6 weeks about, like putting me in on the deal. And, I'd be the first one he turns loose in there like they did with him. And that you wander around and have all kinds of experiences. And then if you come out fine, if you don't come out, they could ship you off up to the highway somewhere until you're...
Well, but in fact, most people came out fine, I think. No, all these drugs, these antipsychotic drugs, are basically warehousing strategies for the convenience of doctors, because the only way that works with people who have this problem is so labor intensive and so demanding. What you need basically is 6 people to watch you, some to hold your hand and reassure you, some to physically grab you and sit on you when you head for the hills. Very few people get through it without being messed with. Like I say, I think I was lucky and my brother was lucky because some force, some intuition led us to get so far out that they couldn't find us. They literally couldn't come and get us. R.D. Lang, as well as Dick, had this idea that people have to go through it.
But not everybody can go to I can't right now go to the jungle.
You've got to have some kind of a support group. And if you don't have a support group, then you have to stay away from people who will mess with it. And, it's hermit time, if nothing else. Yeah.
There are several places now open. One is called Pocket Ranch in Geyserville.
It's $475 a day, and I've been crazy since I'm 15, so I can't even get insurance that would even pay for that. So it's kind of for people that are rich.
No scholarshiping? I don't know.
No, they don't have anything. Steve gave me some brochures when I found out about that. Medicare doesn't pay for that. I'm on disability for psychiatric problems, from Social Security, and they don't pay for shit, which is good in a way, because I don't get too many drugs that won't cover it.
Well, it's hard to tease apart whether you've got. I think it's amazing to me that at Esalen that we're discussing insanity. It's even, I think, a kind of an old-fashioned word. You'd think this would be the thing they would have worked through here. Isn't that what? It was Steve who said to me once, you'll understand this place a lot better if you think of it as a kind of hospital. And I've, looked at it like that ever since. We have all these therapists. The greats have come and gone of 3 schools now, and we don't understand it. So what can we expect from the rest of society? I mean, when I was schizophrenic, if this is what we're talking about, my feeling about it was, and maybe this is, if not true, a delusion worth playing with, is I thought, what we call mental illness, what we call schizophrenia, and what we look into the body or the mind or the personal history or the dream state to try and understand and possibly cure, it's not like that at all. It isn't if you're the person who's nuts, it isn't your problem. It's something that's happened to you. Not more fundamentally than catching the flu. It's like you just happened to step in some cosmic doo-doo, and now it's on the bottom of your shoe, and everybody's pointing at you and backing up, but it isn't your fault. It was just happened to be in your path. It's a kind of, it's a horrible piece of luck unless you can turn it to your own advantage. And what that means, I think, is obviously integrating it. Well, then how do you integrate these things? I think it has to do, again, a lot with where you start from. Just speaking from my own personal experience, what saved me was my cynicism, that I didn't believe in anything, never had always thought believing in things was a bad idea. So then when this whole cosmos of beliefs was handed to me on a platter, I just simply said, maybe, I'll act it out, but I won't believe it. And I think that had I been a good Mormon, a good Catholic, a good Buddhist, a good something else, then I would have been lost, because I would have traded whatever it was I believed for the new set of beliefs. As it was, I just said, what's this? Beliefs. I don't do that. But I played with it, and somehow the playing with it was able to depotentiate it. I had a conversation with someone very recently who, by ordinary standards, I think would have to be considered nutty as a fruitcake. And, they could hardly speak of their condition without being swept by an emotion that was so intense that it reduced them to tears, And I said, if you're going to be this nuts, you should enjoy it more. It's too, and they said, I am enjoying it. And I said, well, I'm not enjoying it because you're just projecting such an emotional intensity that it makes me very nervous. And I think I speak then for the same general masses about that. What makes it hard for the person who's going through this is that it's so hard for other people. I mean, it's freaky to be around somebody who's crazy. I don't, because I'm such a purveyor of psychedelics, people are forever leaning on me to trip with them. And I dare say, there are people in this room who've known me for years, and no one here can say they've ever been seriously loaded with me, because I just don't do it. I can't take it. I can't handle the feeling of risk that permeates that. That's why it amazes me. I'm fascinated by people who have such faith in their knowledge that apparent difficult situations don't freak them out. As an example, some of you know Frank Barr. He's an emergency room doctor. And I'm amazed that he can deal with people who are dead out unconscious and just say, she'll come to in 40 minutes or so. Don't worry about that. When I would be frantic. I mean, if I can't get a reaction out of somebody, I just go berserk. And the notion, I don't know whether that's a kind of callousness. Therapists are like that. I mean, they say, you come upon somebody flopping around on the floor, screaming, pleading, weeping. My inclination is to make them feel better, for God's sake. And a therapist would just say, well, they're working through their stuff. It's all right, How do you get that level of self-confidence where you can see somebody in agony and say, that's all right, it's the best thing for them. Check on them in an hour and see where they're at. It's awfully, so I stay away from it. And in my own situation, I keep people away from me. I've had many trips where I've thought in the middle of it, thank God there's no one here to see this. Because if there were someone here to see it, I'm sure they would become alarmed and decide that some crisis was in progress. And, ultimately you have to sort of get a kind of perspective where you just say, if I die, I die. But it usually has to slam you to the wall pretty severely to make you turn. The image I have is that I run from it until I become so furious at this humiliating situation that I turn and face it. And then, if you curse it, it will step back sometime. And it's worked every time. The other thing is, the wonderful instinct for equilibrium that the human mind has, that you can get pretty twisted around. And if you'll wait 24 hours, 72 hours, 10 days, 6 months, it will restore to equilibrium. I'm puzzled by the cases of permanent raving madness, and I wonder how common they are. It's all messed up in this society. I mean, I can show you psychiatric residents who have never seen an unmedicated schizophrenic in their entire life, because they just do not encounter people in that state. What they deal with are people who come in and been given drugs and kept on drugs and drugs. That's the whole dynamic.
Council,
yeah.
About the last person here that the community really got behind sitting for through a stay. I'm wondering how much to say because she's not here, but perhaps the reason we don't know more about this is, as you say, how many psychiatric residents have ever seen somebody who's not on a caretaking drug.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of energy it took for the community to mobilize to take care of this person was pretty overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a team of 6 to 12 people.
Day in and day
Day
out.
in and day out, and this went on for 10 days or so.
Mm-hmm. And was there a resolution that was satisfying?
There was a resolution of sorts, but the thing that I was most impressed with is in a psychiatric ward among people who didn't know the person, you would have assumed that all these associations were meaningless stuff and that the person had been in, and the review of the material, it all made sense in a particular way. And that would be completely missed. There was definitely a way that a lot of stuff was being worked through, maybe not to satisfaction, but on some level that you couldn't possibly know unless you knew this person very, very well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I saw with my brother. I mean, when my brother went bananas, I sat and, it was a complicated case because there was something wrong with me in the sense that I didn't sleep for 11 days. But he raved day and night. And what in every single thing was or to my mind, at least 90% of it was incredibly interesting and revelatory. He imitated every relative. He imitated music teachers not dealt with since age 6. He revealed vast scenarios of stuff going on in the town where we had grown up together. Well, if he had been straitjacketed in a ward somewhere, they would have just thought that this was garbage, and what it actually was, brilliant, insightful, almost literarily deep stuff. And the other thing is, I've always thought, that a mental ward, I don't understand the thinking of the psychiatric community. A mental ward is my idea of an environment designed to drive you crazy. I mean, because crazy people drive me crazy. Just one who is very slightly crazy is unbearable. And to be put into a ward with people wandering around, and I really think it's a pheromonal I don't want to go as far as some people have gone and say that schizophrenia is entirely a pheromonal disorder. But do you know what I'm talking about here? Well, some people say that that we have left over from earlier stages of evolution all kinds of physiological systems that produce odors that we are not consciously aware of, but that set the ambiance for social interaction, because we are, after all, social animals. We're as social as honeybees or something. And all social animals regulate behavior through pheromones. And it's known, for instance, that when a person walks into a crowded room, instinctively the first thing they do is they take a deep breath. And it's thought that this is a whole bunch of chemical messengers are coming in saying, people have been drinking, one couple isn't getting along, somebody's on the make, so all this stuff is going on, and you get this gestalt in one single moment. Well, then, because of a phenomenon that's fairly common called allophrenia, which is where your friend gets committed to a mental hospital for schizophrenic behavior, and you buy a book and take it to them and visit them, and while visiting, you behave so oddly that you're not allowed to leave. Allophrenia. Schizophrenic behavior by non-schizophrenic persons in the presence of schizophrenia. It's thought that perhaps what schizophrenia is an odor malfunction where the person who is becoming schizophrenic is literally beginning to smell funny. And this causes the people around them to begin to send the wrong signal, which begins to activate anxiety in the schizophrenic person, which accentuates the production of the pheromones. So then people start saying, that guy's really weird. He's so weird. Well, then the person picks up on this. And what's happening, your word, ostracized. They're being pushed to the periphery of the social thing. And they feel it's unfair because and the people doing it don't know why they're doing it. And what's happening is it's a horrible misunderstanding, and it ends in making somebody completely dysfunctional because they don't know, they've lost their place in the net. They literally don't know who they are.
And yeah, you're pointing out a fragile and kind of a desperate nature of consensual reality, where there's a desperate grip on this consensual reality, and when that starts to slip, when people feel that that's slipping, there's some grabbing that goes on, and that's the response that you're talking about.
Yeah, that it's somehow we're all anxious about this. I mean, consciousness, after all, is probably, less than 100,000 years old. So and we're losing it all the time. I mean, when you deal with these real nightmare trips, like the Jeffrey Dahmer thing, the reason that's so horrifying, I think, is because it's a loss of any value that you can relate to. It's like the real darkness rises up, and you say, it's all so fragile. If we stopped loving each other, or even just talking about how we should love each other, then, cannibalism, murder, sacrifice, death, inevitably these really horrifying mass murder things are very primitive in some sense. Dismemberment and so forth. It's fetishism. It's an activation of primitive forms of behavior. So I think the anxiety we feel around these issues is because mental clarity, sanity, belonging, these things are fragile, and we've each earned it, and it wasn't easy, and so we're anxious about our purchase on it. I always felt that in the 60s, it was so clear to me when LSD was around and that I would debate it with my parents, and people were talking about whether they would take it or not, that the people who were alarmed by it were alarmed by it because they self-diagnosed themselves as insane. They knew, said, we don't want it. Are you kidding? A drug that opens the doorways to the inner world of the mind? No, thank you. That's the last thing we're interested in. And they were right. They had no business fiddling with that. Well, we're the children of those people, and in some cases, maybe those people ourselves. So it's very dicey. I really admire people. I don't understand these people who just take these enormous doses of psychedelics and it just beats the shit out of them, and 1 week later they're back ready for more. They don't, it's like they're made of different stuff than I am. Don't they understand, that I admire them. I just don't have that kind of stamina. I take it too seriously. Alan, did you want to say something?
Well, I was confused by what you were saying. Who are you referring to that does this?
Which?
It takes huge doses and it slams them around?
Well, I know people who just describe outlandish trips and then they say they'll be doing 8 grams again and looking forward to it. And I know one person who says, each time I take it, I try to stand more. And I have the feeling, that it's very coddling of me, and that I sort of march around inside a hall of mirrors, because I can say to it, stop coddling me. And after 30 seconds of what happens when I say that, I'm saying, coddle me, enough already. Because it begins to go fugue-like and lift these veils, and you say, it's, I don't know, maybe I read too much H.P. Lovecraft as a kid, and it contaminated my categories.
Yeah, and something that David said that is sort of away from psychedelics, but on this vein of discovering something that maybe I keep myself from, some, not just your normal discoveries, but those real choice little cherries. And somewhere I have this, it almost seems like it's a tape that says, well, if you know that, and if you claim it, then how will you fit in the rest of the world? And it's like a stop measure. I don't know how to explain it, but when you were talking, I was really getting that, and I was hoping I could share it. I haven't ever really talked about this with anybody, so it does feel vulnerable. But aside from that, it seems like there's something that is remembered when I have a revelation, or when I really understand something, like I cognate with something, it almost feels like it's a memory that's come back. And, again, I'm speaking of, I don't even know, of the real choice mysteries, but, kind of keep ourselves for somehow. And I don't know, I guess I just wanted to share that, but maybe what experience have you had with that?
But that's a positive, it's an uplifting experience, right?
The stopping isn't.
Talk more about the stopping.
Well, I guess I get to a place that is almost like, what I see are lots of different past lives. I don't even know if they're past lives, really. I can't even categorize them as that, but I see different symbols, different relationships to civilizations. And, just kind of I sense things that I knew, or things that, were available. Things that are available to all of us on an even greater scale. Sort of some universal, or even, some people call it the Akashic Records or something. But not to be too much in that vein. And I'll start to grasp it, and I'll start to maybe claim it or understand it, and then I'll get this, I'll get sort of this imbalance going, or maybe it's my thought that if I have it, then I won't have this place in the world, or I won't have a place in the world that nobody else is like me.
You mean that you'll learn something that will set you so apart that you'll not be able to fit into the world?
Yes.
For me, I have a horror sometimes of the sense of when I come down, as I start to come down, of the certainty that I'm coming into illusion in something that is essentially meaningless compared to where I just was.
So a horror of return.
It's a horror of that I've somehow created a universe that is like, somehow it's my fault that I'm returning to something that is less than
what it might be, or what it could be,
yeah,
or what you saw it to be in that state.
And then I will gradually forget, and experiences of gradually forgetting even that.
Well, maybe we're a special slice. I mean, there is the notion that, first of all, it's a monkey brain that we're operating with here. Nowhere is it writ large that it can actually encompass the truth. I mean, why should it? I mean, do we believe that banana trees perceive the truth? They're flatworms, so why should monkeys? So then if you're into these consciousness expanding techniques, whether they're just simply paying attention or using psychedelic drugs or something else, then you actually get to a place where there is, it's like an abyss of knowing. It's like, that poem that says, I look over your meaning's edge and feel the dizziness of the things that you have not said. Well, that's about a relationship. But it could also just be, I look over meaning's edge and feel the dizziness of things unsaid. It's that nowhere is it writ that the universe should be rationally apprehendable. And maybe when you get the distances and the energies and the time scales, when you have even a remote intimation of these things, it's your mind can't handle it. It actually implodes under the force of reality. I mean, I sort of feel like that what we have uncovered with all this thinking and exploring is not the white light or some cheerful Buddhist hypostatization like that, but what we've uncovered is ungodly complexity. I remember once at the height of an LSD trip years ago being with somebody who yelled out, "I'm drowning in the spaghetti of ambiguity." I know that feeling, it's just that, it's all very cut and dried. And then you start delving and you start, reading weird literature and taking strange drugs and going to strange places, and you begin this deconstruction process. And what you find out is not only that the world is weirder than you can suppose, but that this situation is fundamentally alarming, that the world is stranger than you can suppose. And it carries an existential implication. It does for me. I mean, I can't believe anymore that just now speaking of the psychedelics, that this is about human psychology. You press it too hard and go too far. And I always think of that amazing scene in Rosemary's Baby where Mia Farrow, in the middle of this dream, sits up and says, "My God, this is really happening." And that's the thing which lies behind all this delving, that, the cheerful assumption that it's all mental and that you're going to return to reality and that the here and now is the stable part of the mandala, it may not be true, or it seems to me that it's not necessarily true. And then you just say, you could find out something that would make it impossible to speak to anybody, that you would just have to turn away from people with an unspeakable truth and be isolated by it.
I wanted to ask a question that came up for me last weekend.
Mm-hmm.
You said that when you took DMT to the shamans in South America, the ayahuasqueros, and they said that it was ancestor spirits were coming through. A comment, I believe I heard you say this, that the ayahuasqueros seemed to be more interested in using the ayahuasca or the medicines they had for more like a doctor would. That is how I've used them. I would say more like helping someone.
Mm-hmm.
And how you use them is more for an inquiry, like to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference? Is one more of a psychological approach and one more an intellectual? I'm curious.
Well, yeah, I mean, one is a shamanic approach because the center thing of shamanism is healing. I mean, that's really how you judge a shaman in a traditional fashion, is by healing. And then this other, it is intellectual, and because the idea is to be able to say something. And I guess maybe where the problem comes, and I'm blinded to it because I have the problem, is that you have to have heart, a lot of it. I mean, maybe more heart than I'm able to muster. And that if you try and do it through the intellect alone, it becomes, I don't know, there's some mythological metaphor here, but it becomes titanic. It becomes dangerous and possibly capable of collapsing upon itself. Maybe the healing is the way you pay your dues, and that somehow curiosity alone is a false coinage, and that the lack of the desire to heal is the manifestation of the lack of heart. I mean, I don't know. I just know, that if you have a heart mission, I think it's easier to travel those rails. Anybody else? Yeah.
I was just yesterday confronted with this accident on Highway 1 here, which was pretty major. And somebody died in a burning car wreck. And the ground process, I realized that how traumatic that was for me. And like how the whole day before I was kind of like everything turned gray, and I was really trying to get out of it. And it reminded me of, not only for myself, but like sometimes you see something that's just like so horrible, we feel you have seen too much and it makes you insane. And I was just wondering about that, that connection that you maybe witnessed something as a child or at war or whatever that is just so horrific about the potential of, the human race or whatever happens that you can't fathom it, that you can't, try to leave.
And you mean, and then you're like contaminated by this image. Yeah, well, I think a lot about that kind of thing because, one of the things that has been established through places like Esalen, I think, and rightly so, and correctly, is that images can heal, and that visualization can promote health and this sort of thing. But what you never hear discussed then is the implied opposite, which is that some images can harm, and that information has a quality of harming and hurting. We are the inheritors of Lockean theories of government, and so our approach toward information is, free speech, and anything can be said. But I don't know whether this I feel very sensitive to images. It's a kind of funny thing. So I don't own a TV simply because I think it's a source of toxic imaging. And one of the forms that the encroaching madness induced by the psychedelics takes, I've noticed, is that you are open to invasion by images that are loose in the mass consciousness. On 3 separate occasions, I've seen people freak out on psychedelics about Charles Manson. Either they thought they were Manson, or they thought I was Manson, or they thought something, Well, it's clear that this is toxic information that moves around in the body politic and then is magnified under certain circumstances. Auschwitz, all of this stuff, and all the images of sadomasochism, and our society seems more into this than any in history. I read a really freaky thing. I don't even understand some of this stuff. This is my idea of toxic information. Maybe some of you saw this. It was in Time or Newsweek around the time of the Jeffrey Dahmer trial. Norman Mailer wrote an essay on the psychotic as harbinger of future style, and said, the psychotic is the role model for the future. And like I say, I can't even understand what this stuff means or who understands this, but I didn't think it should be said. I thought, this is the raving of a diseased mind, and now it's in the bloodstream of the culture. Huh? Yeah. And it contaminates. A whole culture can sink into madness, we like to think we're in a terminal phase of decadence, but the Roman Emperor Heterogabulus used to castrate his lovers and hurl them out on the front steps of the official residence to be found in the morning by the street sweepers. We have a way to go before we get to those places. But still, maybe it's because of Freud and Nietzsche and all the bad boys of the 19th century or something, but we really have pried open a fairly toxic aspect of ourselves. And in the name of facing ourselves, we tend to make ourselves more ill, I think. I've always had trouble with Stan's theory about the unconscious, and I can't go to those slideshows with the crazy, I can't take it, and I don't know what that means about me, whether it means I'm sensitive or feel threatened by all that stuff, but it just seems to me unnecessary and unhelpful. Yeah.
I found that to be true too. 6 hours of that type of slideshow was too much.
Well, and when you hear about somebody like Salvador Roquette, who will take, a room full of Jewish women from Yonkers and give them 500 micrograms of LSD and then show Auschwitz army footage of Auschwitz, you think, this is my idea of hell. This is exactly what I don't want to get near and would expect to emerge from severely impaired in my personal progress, This is kind of a downer, isn't it? I think there's an impulse in a lot of schools of psychotherapy to rub your nose in it. And I don't know, you represent a school. How do you see that? I don't know what your school's position is on this, but do we have to rub our nose in it, or we miss it, or what's that all about?
I'm not going to talk in terms of the school, but if I take psychedelics, I go out in nature.
And you're okay there.
And I'm okay there. And so that what I don't want amplified won't happen. That's what I personally do. I can't imagine doing that or exposing it. I can't imagine taking 1,000 micrograms of LSD in this room at night.
Right, that would be too profaning. Uh-huh.
That's my own personal.
But it isn't. You can never insulate yourself from it. I mean, I've had trips about nature that are sort of along the lines of, the life cycle of the alien, and it was all about how it was a vision of nature as this thing feeding upon itself, and how egg cases were being inserted into tissue, and free swimming life stages were attaching to tissue, and pathways were it's a yuck image, and that could come easily out of examining 6 square inches of soil under a redwood tree. It isn't always affirming. It's like there's a balance in your own perception that if it's thrown off, a sunset can drive you into despair. What is the general? There's a lot of expertise in the room. Is it useful for us to go through these darker sides of ourselves? Do we feel better afterwards, or does bringing it to the surface then you have shit on the surface?
I personally think, because it must be my German heritage, I like to go into those places and like to discover those dark sides of my soul or whatever it is, I like to really rub my nose into it because usually if something isn't a part of me, it doesn't touch me.
Uh-huh.
So if something touches me the way, I like to go to the root of it.
And what is there when you get there? I mean, what's the experience, in other words, of instead of saying, oh no, not that, my God, saying, oh great, a chance to understand more about myself and rush in it. What do you find when you get in there?
I just find that I get a more complete picture of the whole.
Uh-huh.
Like I feel like I get, the karmic wheel.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm discovering every aspect of it instead of just heading for the light, and gives me a better understanding of human nature, of the human psyche, of my own psyche.
Yeah, well, I think
I don't think it's pleasurable.
But is it awful?
It's awful if you make it awful. It's awful when you put a judgment on it.
So the trick is to just not judge it.
The trick is to just not judge it and just see it at the other side of the karmic wheel.
Well, I think that's what I do, but I feel, it's a struggle to not judge it. You say, oh God, if I judge this, it will get worse. I should just try and ride it through.
I'll give a try on the school part of it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, and what's haunting me is this picture of having these women from Yonkers take 500 micrograms and watch this stuff. I mean, there is this modern pop psychology idea, some of which is to the monetary benefit of therapy, that wallowing in this stuff gets you somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And my current thinking, which is always, of course, subject to change, is that very fine edge between not denying something and not wallowing in it either.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very
That's a good point. Yeah.
Allowing.
Yeah.
Allowing.
That's what I mean. You stay the observer to it. You become the witness to it, and without judging it as good or bad or whatever. It's just.
So a kind of detachment.
Yeah.
Well, even more than
different.
that, from the Gestalt perspective, which I'll represent, the edge between wallowing and you don't ever want to deny, but you want to go into something far enough to begin to get a reversal, begin to get the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So, from a theoretical thing, I don't know how wallowing would ever serve that purpose.
So what you're talking about, though, is coming to a place of balance, right? Ultimately,
Well,
it's being able to integrate and accept all of the various aspects.
Mm-hmm.
But wallowing obviously is not coming to a point of balance. What you're talking about with the women from Yonkers and the watching the film, I mean, that is, you don't come into balance by assaulting your psyche with everything that is the most horrific that you could possibly confront. And I think that can be very damaging, and probably more so to some people than others, because people's tolerances are different, people's individual place of balance is different, and so I think there is a lot of individual variation, and it's very subtle and it's very delicate. But I agree that toxicity is toxic in whatever form it comes, and if it has that effect, I do not see benefit in that.
Well, perhaps a better word than wallowing could be formulated. It's just the one that I chose. But in dealing with psychological material, you're mostly dealing with something that's already happened. So why would you ever want to stay in something that the outcome is predetermined, that you already know the end?
Mm-hmm.
And most people are most afraid of what they've already experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you want to spend a lot of time hanging around in a bad place that you've already experienced, that you already know the end outcome of, but you also don't want to deny that it happened?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of edge. That may be a better way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
To begin then to get a reversal.
Yeah, I think we all have a sense of that there should be a balance, but we all have a different sense of where it should be. I mean, for instance, I feel mild irritation with people who don't like horror literature, but I don't like slasher literature, and I'm very clear what the difference is. I mean, one is psychological and the other is science fiction, but I can't put up with Silence of the Lambs and From There On because it's offensive. But on the other hand, if somebody doesn't want to see Alien because they say it scares them, I think that they're a nervous Nelly, and that they should actually steel themselves to this experience. And it's good to watch Alien because you learn something.
Well, I think that's it. It confers an immunity. It's one of the reasons why people go. There's a feeling that it confers some sort of immunity by having undergone it.
Maybe that's why people are into all these affectations of negativity. It's a kind of sympathetic magic. So maybe this is why adolescents who feel tremendously empowered are into, t-shirts with dismembered bodies and, bands whose images rotate around themes of mayhem, incest, and destruction. It's a kind of counter charm. And in that case, it shouldn't be put down. These people are not sick. They're doing something to keep from being sick. They're gaining confidence by associating in a familiar manner with the things that actually make them very nervous and uneasy. I mean, I don't know. This could be cheap shot. But I tend to, I would stick with that for a minute. I tend to think that's true because I know some of these people who are behind all of these symbols, and they seem like very nice people who are striving to keep their lives together. I mean, my son is one of them. Every time I have an impulse to condemn, it is pretty horrific. I mean, my son brings home CDs, and I read the lyrics, and it is a jaw dropper what some of this stuff is, But then if you actually play the CD, you discover that the lyrics are so lost in walls of noise and special effects and all this other stuff that it isn't as in your face as when you read the lyrics. And in any case, nobody's ever topped that Doors song about murdering your father and screwing your mother, and that was the anthem of our generation. So who are we to point a finger at Guns N' Roses? We think of the Doors as a wholesome impulse or something. I don't know. Some incredible mental sleight of hand goes on here. Sympathy for the devil, all of this stuff. It's black in that phase. But if you're in it, it's fun, it's theater, it establishes a ring pass not that keeps the boring people out. If you're on the outside, this is pathological, demented, it leads to mass murder, and it's unacceptable. Well, you gotta go easy on some of this. Anybody?
Where do you stand to judge anything is what comes up with that.
Right.
I have a question about Prague. The conference that was held there, not the advertised conference, but the one that was not advertised. What was the outshoot of that, if you can talk about it, as far as the future of psychedelics in this country? And will they be made legal again at some point? Or do we anticipate that?
Something's going on. I don't understand. There's some kind of high-level policy review underway. It's hard to figure out what is happening at this moment to motivate it. Maybe it's that Europe is actually moving closer and closer to legitimizing research, and it just puts pressure on the American scientific establishment. Rick Strassman has been able to do his DMT study in New Mexico. That ibogaine study on the East Coast is moving forward on the flimsiest of evidence. I don't believe for a moment that ibogaine interrupts morphine addiction. I think it's a brilliant ploy for getting a research program funded, but just the evidence, I don't know. As I understand it, it's one guy's sort of personal revelation. I don't know, it probably depends on whether or not there's a change of administration. In that, if there is no change of administration, you can be damn sure there won't be an era of psychedelic research.
What was the conference? What was that conference?
Well, it was the ITA, with the International Transpersonal Association, and then there was an unannounced conference headed by Rick Doblin
Right.
of MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And I was just curious. I haven't heard anything yet from that.
They had a lot of people there. It was essentially the international psychedelic community is still defining itself because there's no consensus about methods or materials. I mean, some people are using ketamine in psychotherapy. Other people regard it as a veterinary anesthetic, and you can't tell who's got it right. But I think the maturity of the European research community is just sufficient that they're probably going to restart it. And then this country will have to decide what it's going to do. Anybody want to say any more about this? Let me see if I wanted to say any more about it. It made me think of a funny cartoon, the whole subject of madness. Maybe some of you saw this cartoon in the New Yorker a few years ago, but a bunch of obviously very straight businessmen are sitting around a conference table, and they have the downward moving chart of their company's profits up on the wall in front of them. And the CEO is saying to a smiling man sitting at the end of the table, "It's true, Headley, a deliberate derangement of the senses worked for Rimbaud, but would it work for us?" And it's worth remembering, that this madness we fear so much, we are essentially the unhappy inheritors of the Romantic legacy. I mean, they brought this upon us. This is what they wanted. They worshiped this. And the entirety of the 20th century has been a deconstruction of gentlemanly reason. Abstract expressionism, all of these things, Freudianism, Jung, National Socialism, it's all anti-reasonable. I mean, from the point of view of the 19th century, we don't have to worry about madness. We are mad, every last one of us. I mean, we've so thoroughly imbibed the values of modernity that we are incomprehensible to our own past. And this brings up the issue of, someone said it was a problem of consensus. What do you do if the society is crazy? Then what happens to the concept of madness? During the 2 years that the body was being grown and prepared for the transplant, the brain could be kept alive, should be kept alive, but that the insurance company had the right to choose the cheapest method of keeping the brain alive, consistent with good medical practice. Well, the cheapest method of keeping the brain alive, consistent with good medical practice, was a direct implant into the body cavity of the other signatory on the insurance policy, who was this guy's wife. And so for 2 years, she carried the brain as an implant in her body cavity. And, the psychological changes and the feeling of obligation and guilt and the way in which this twisted these people's relationship is easily imagined. None of us have ever, would your girlfriend do that for you? Would you do that for your girlfriend? And how would you think of this person after you had been through that? That's not a very far-fetched thing. I mean, that's not as far-fetched really as, well, it involves cloning and forced aging, but a full understanding of the physiological and psychological functioning of the human organism will make these kinds of things child's play. And then The moral questions, is this a good thing? Should it be done? Our repugnance, immediate repugnance, or at least mine, to this kind of thing, is a repugnance that would probably extend to many medical procedures that are routine today. It's just doctors don't rub the nose of the public in this stuff, but they do, outlandish procedures in the name of prolonging life and ameliorating pain. How we feel about this is, I think, probably one of the major issues of the next century will be, how extraordinary should our efforts be to preserve and maintain life? And if we attain a perfect medical technology so that unless somebody's stone cold dead for 6 months, nothing can be done for them, then how are we to apply this? Is it immortality for the wealthy and prolonged life for the middle class, and the devil takes the hindmost for the suffering proletariat? Or how will all that be worked out? What is the ethics of all that? Any comment on all of this, or question? Is it all perfectly clear here what's going on? Yeah, this is appalling stuff. And yet, knowing human beings to be the creatures they are, if there are livers walking around in the poor sections of third world cities worth $20,000 a pop, it's asking a great deal to not believe that criminal syndicates will prey on these people. I can remember my shock, disbelief. It was a growing moment for me when I was in India, when I learned that all these extremely dramatically deformed people who were begging from me, that these had been healthy children whose poor parents had saved up the family savings so these people could be taken to these surgical clinics as children and deliberately deformed in order to give them a profession. It's like, here is your mother and my gift to you. Blindness, spinal deformity, so forth and so on, so that you may now enter the begging union. This is the other thing you may not understand about India. These people begging on the street, everybody is in the union. You give somebody $1, that isn't their dollar. Under fear of death, they turn that dollar in at the end of the day, and they are given a percentage of it, and the rest is distributed to the other members of the begging union. So this is, so counter to Western values that we don't know where to begin or who to blame or who to condemn on a deal like that. So, and as Kathleen makes the point, we're part of the problem. This trade in organs would not exist if it weren't for people like you and I who have medical insurance policies that will pay for these outrageous procedures and pay these incredible amounts of money. And the logical extrapolation of this is, in fact, a society where the rich live forever. And this can be done. I mean, it can't be done today, but in a way, we're experiencing it. I mean, if the average lifespan in Bangladesh is 33, and the average lifespan here in Big Sur is 78, you got to figure money and a clean food supply and access to medical procedures is what's making the difference. Yeah.
Quality of life. I'm speaking about the elderly and doctors who prolong life for the elderly for religious reasons or whatever. Families are willing to allow doctors to step in and prolong life.
When there is no quality of life left.
And of course, this is, the doctors are getting richer, and the families feel that this is what God wants.
Well,
there's no natural ending.
Yeah, in a sense, science has forced the hand of religion, because science, the religious impulse, care for the sick. We talked about this last night. This is a great moral obligation, a great moral teaching. We should feed the hungry, clothe the naked, bury the dead, care for the sick. But if caring for the sick means, prolonging the agony of dying people for purposes of money, it doesn't make any sense at all. People are afraid to touch this issue. It relates to abortion. It relates to what Dr. Kevorkian is doing, because it's easy to say life in all circumstances should be preserved. The problem is that's an egghead, distanced, rational. You're not up to your elbows in guts when you make that statement. What really needs to be preserved is the quality of experience. And when the quality of experience sinks below a certain level, I don't think we're doing anybody a favor. Not the dying person, not their family, not the medical establishment is corrupted because it no longer knows what it's doing. But again, as you point out, we are so factionalized by religious beliefs and other philosophical differences that we don't want to look this in the face. We don't want to kill people who don't want to die, no matter how horrifying their circumstance is. And so the thing is not being handled at all. It's being allowed to develop in extremely messy directions, and we should all have a great concern. I mean, it may seem abstract this evening because we all sit here, but you could drive out of here tomorrow and in a moment of mechanical failure have your life turned upside down and find yourself in a hospital in Monterey with people trying to decide, what did you want, what should be done, what can be done, how much money do you have? They want to know how much money is in your bank account to figure out how much effort should be expended to try and save you. This doesn't exactly sound to me like the Hippocratic Oath in action.
But even if you leave instructions that you do not want your life prolonged under certain circumstances, that can be meaningless, depending. It's just a very kind of murky area, even though the law may say that, yes, this is the instructions the person left. There's so many things that can happen, with the doctors and with the family and so on and so on. And it's simple.
Yeah, it's where the pedal meets the metal.
And the person involved is really, that person is not even a factor anymore. His wishes, his intentions, it's now pretty mentally.
Well, it's a very difficult question. I mean, you may recall in Brave New World, Aldous Huxley's wonderful dystopia. People there are genetically engineered. They live to age 65 in the bodies of 25-year-olds, and then they die very suddenly. Well, now that's sort of a horrifying possibility, too. That's the other end of the spectrum. Just cut through all of this and avoid the class distinctions and the technological differences and appoint a human lifespan and say, we will do everything in our power to make sure you live to be 70 years old and you'll be dancing on your 69th birthday and chasing young men all over the map and eating like a horse. But come age 71, you will be dead, and we will make sure of it. That also freaks us out. So it's one of these places where, though we do everything through collective decision, our politics, our economics, our art, everything is achieved by consensus. About this, we have no consensus. And yet every single one of us is moving toward this weird domain where this will not be abstract, this will be all that will matter. And what instructions should we, do we want carried out? Somewhat gloomy subject. I didn't really mean to wander this way, but I do love the science fiction of Greg Egan, this new Australian science fiction writer, and his novels tend to more cosmic themes, but his short stories are just one scenario after another of these near-term medical dilemmas that could involve quite ordinary people. And this is all with easily extrapolatable medical technology that we see taking shape all around us. If you take the leap into more wild-eyed speculation, then you have the possibility of, and this is fully explored in Greg Egan's fiction as well, the possibility of digitizing human experience, actually downloading consciousness out of bodies and into machines. Well, everybody says, well, that's a horrible idea. I wouldn't have that done to me. Well, would you if you were 24 hours away from death? If that were the option? If they were saying, we're either going to pull the plug or we're going to download you and then pull the plug. Check which box you would prefer. How many people would say, well, I don't know, I've always been skeptical about this download business, but hey, at this point, why not? Well, then, but the strange thing is digitizing a digital existence may turn out to be an eternity of experience. We operate at 100 hertz sitting here, 100 cycles a second. That's about how the rate at which your body-mind system works. The PC sitting on the desk comes now, if it's a good one, with 2 400 megahertz processors in it. What is that? 80,000 times more events can be packed by that computer into a second than you can pack into a second. An hour inside that computer is like 80,000 hours outside the computer. So right at the brink of death, you can suddenly opt for a strange new kind of eternal existence. Not that different from being born. I mean, it involves a machine, of course, but maybe biological death will be something for Mennonites and the Amish, and all the rest of us will opt for, of course, digital existence. But then, of course, there have to be insurance policies to make sure your disk isn't erased and the electricity keeps running and nobody rewrites your code and nobody overwrites your code and yes, it would have to be very careful updating. And then the question is, whose obligation after a few hundred years, whose obligation is it to keep these digital ghosts alive? Is it society's obligation after your fortune has long been run out and your relatives have forgotten you and you're still romping through the virtual fields of Elysium? Of course, maybe you can do useful work in there and be paid and deposit that salary into the account, which keeps the machine running, it all comes down to money. Isn't that weird? Very interesting. I mean, it's all money, how much life you can buy, how many indulgences your tithing can procure for you. It's all paying off somebody. As William Burroughs said, it's all some kind of a racket. Which doesn't mean you want to throw down your cards and stomp off into the dark, because it's the only racket in town. So you have to be very careful about rejecting it. I wonder how many people, it seems to me these choices are now upon us. If we wait too long, if we think of it as science fiction, if we push it away from us, then those who didn't behave as we do will make it their business to make the decisions. This is all being put in place right now. All kinds of other stuff. I don't know how many of you read the New York Times today, but it was Science Tuesday, so there was a long article in the science section on these things called SNPs, the portion of the DNA that we differ from each other in regarding, and this is where all the genetic diseases and hereditary conditions that limit our functionability reside and all that. Well, long before people are deciding whether they want to be digitized and downloaded into circuitry, genes are going to be bought and sold like CD-ROMs. Do you want them? Do you want, and what will be the moral arguments against them? They are like prostheses of a non-mechanical sort, but do you want the gene that makes you immune to liver cancer? Do you want the gene which prolongs sexual vitality? Do you want the gene which makes you immune to the malarial organism? Such genes exist and can be easily manufactured by the millions and presumably implanted fairly easily. Well, then are we going to produce, as in Brave New World, you remember, everybody was slightly fey, meaning gender expression had been kind of ameliorated. The women, everybody was bisexual, and everybody was photogenically perfect. Everybody had toned bodies, clear vision, quick reflexes, because that was just the optimizing of the human form. Well, to resist that is to cling to your individuality, your slightly crossed eyes, your vague stammer, your this and that. Is that some weird form of sentimentality? Or is it the last vestige of what makes you uniquely you? Do we want to become a society of tennis coaches, essentially?
It becomes a question of freedom. What happens to freedom?
Well, yes, and who is going to tell somebody else, no, you may not have a breast implant or change your eye color or your gender or your intelligence or your preference for white wine over red?
But even
what are you saying?
Saying that the freedom of I see with being able to pick every gene. You could say I'm going to have a child and I want him to have an IQ of 180 and blue eyes and all of that. Well, that is really not freedom, in my view, because it's programming something. It's like,
Well, it's that weird freedom that we're so fond of in this society. It's the freedom to choose. Uh, but it's not really a freedom. If everyone decides to look like a tennis coach, then what happened to how is this freedom? And how can we expect to get an Einstein and an Andy Warhol and a William Burroughs and a Mick Jagger and so forth out of a world where everybody is the same? Of course, celebrity genes will be hugely popular and expensive. I mean, you can have Jagger's lips. You can have, these. So I don't. Fortunately, we will each have to solve these problems only for ourselves. But how the whole thing comes out, what it comes out looking like, I'm not sure. I mean, if you go to Los Angeles, essentially this is a society that is testing the edge of this, because there, breasts are routinely redesigned, so are faces, so are lips, so are bottoms. People tan themselves, tone themselves, halt their aging process, switch their gender, and my God, you wouldn't dare say a word against all this. You'd be denounced as some kind of recidivist reactionary, some kind of crypto-fascist of some sort, for sure. The problem is, I think, that there is a hellish marriage between market values and human decision making in our culture. I mean, we think you have freedom of choice if there are 11 brands of soap confronting you when you go to the A&P. Well, is that real choice? Or is the real choice whether or not the A&P should exist? We confine ourselves in a neotenized environment of fetishized choice, and the glamour of choice is driven by advertising. For instance, I had this conversation with somebody in the last 24 hours. One of the genes very likely to be quickly isolated and understood is the gene for obesity. Well, does that mean that, in 100 years, children will ask about a time when there were people walking around who didn't weigh a perfect 145 and have a perfect body? But we can't ask obese people to not avail themselves of this therapy if they feel psychologically imprisoned by their condition. How do we view obesity? Do we view it the same way we view nearsightedness, as a condition to be corrected by whatever means available? Or are we as a species somehow enriched by having very, very obese people, very short people, very tall people, people who are different from ourselves? How do we value difference? And then when you move on into the mental domain, it just becomes unmanageable. The price of understanding is power, not consequence, as science seems to believe. If we understand this, we will control it. No, if we will understand it, we will have no choice but to attempt to control it with the sure knowledge that we will fail. I mean, that is more the real implication. Maybe what it means is that human history can't be controlled by human beings. That technologies and our flaws, like greed, like vanity, have always made hellish marriages with each other, and our best intent to be decent people, to raise our children well, to be present for our neighbors in times of pain and so forth and so on, are simply dragged along by the shadow and its obsessive relationship to the technologies which it produces. You know, McLuhan is famous for saying no technology in history has ever been put in place with even a partial understanding of what its consequences would be. Not the automobile, not the printing press, not the phonetic alphabet, and certainly not biotechnology and computers. And each one of these technologies has exalted and enriched the lives of a group of people and plunged other groups of people into hells previously unimagined. I mean, the printing press creates the whole notion of literacy, literature, the class of intelligentsia, so forth and so on. But it also creates propaganda, advertising, the mechanisms that are used to support repressive forms of government and marketing. So again, and what I've said at various times in these talks is it's easy to sketch out dilemmas. It's almost impossible to offer reassuring closure. Whitehead said it's the business of the future to be dangerous. Of course, he said that in 1920 when it wasn't nearly as dangerous as it is now. Had he been staring down the barrel of atomic weapons, gene therapy, so forth and so on, he might have felt differently. For sure, there is no percentage in ignoring these issues or sweeping them under the rug or thinking it's not germane to our lives. We all live, I mean, I don't know what your life is like, but I feel like I live far from the pinnacle of possibilities. I mean, I suppose if I were, a professional in a science like brain surgery or implant design or something like that I would be at the edge. One of the things that is not clear to people is that most of what they know about the world is randomly garnered information from unreliable sources. Very few people professionally deal with information in such a way as that they try to find out what is actually going on and what the limits of possibility are, even in specialized fields of knowledge like computer network design or research mathematics or gene sequencing or something like that. They don't communicate across the face of the wave of knowledge. And so people in a given field may feel kind of vertiginous thrill of their field reaching levels of power and understanding that it's striven for a long time, but they don't understand this is happening simultaneously in so many fields of knowledge that it's redefining the very nature of the enterprise of understanding and the very experience of being. I mean, a person who insisted on living as totally on the edge as they possibly could would be an object of discomfort for most of us, I think. I mean, I was at a conference a year or so ago in England that was sponsored by this thing in England called the ICA, which is a very pretentious kind of umbrella organization for contemporary artists. Well, I have a mild interest in contemporary art, have had for 30 years, but when I sat down with those people, I realized, if you are not halfway through your gender switching operation, if you have not hung yourself by hooks from your pectorals in the sun, if you have not integrated machines into your body, if you don't speak this language of deconstructionism and crypto sadomasochism and so forth and so on, nobody wants to talk to you. You have nothing to contribute to the dialogue at this point. The dialogue and art, we're told, is always the torchbearer at the edge of the human enterprise. Well, if that's what's going on among the torchbearers, then we all need to prepare ourselves for a nearly unimaginable future. Some of you may have read that essay a few years ago, I think it was in Atlantic Monthly, by Norman Mailer, about the future of psychosis. And he said, it was basically, he was reflecting on the Jeffrey Dahmer murder case. And he said, we must struggle to avoid a future where most of us keep human body parts in our refrigerators. And for us, this is like, you must be kidding. But, I don't think so. I think the preservation of humanness and of human values in the presence of technology has been a battle that we have been losing so far because we weren't conscious of the rules and the parameters of the game, but that we should quickly awaken and realize, and I don't have any set of rules or an agenda, but this needs to be talked about. What is a human being, and how, therefore, once we figure that out or have a committee form an impression or something, once we decide what a human being is, how can we build societies which honor that? And right now we have a society that is completely dehumanizing. I mean, we are not people in the eyes of our society. In the eyes of our society, we are workers and customers. That's the only part that now matters to the overstructure. I mean, yes, you may go sit under a tree and write a poem or smell the roses, but you are not contributing. You have to argue that you're contributing. What they really want you to do is, why don't you go to work, or why don't you relax and go shop? You may shop, you may work. So we are defined economically, and we find that pretty horrifying. But wait until we are further restricted in the mass definitions that we reflect back upon ourselves. And places, Esalen is known as the foundation of the human potential movement. Well, if there were ever an enemy poised at human potential, it's this. And by this, I don't mean technology, I don't mean computers, I don't mean gene therapy, I mean our unwillingness and inability to get hold of these things and make them serve a human agenda. As every time we isolate a new physical principle or something like that, the least among us rush forward with the question, how can we construe this into a military technology? In other words, how can we use this to kill people we disagree with? Well, this tells you that we have been perverted by our technologies, and that our essential humanness has been severely undermined. How to reclaim this? Well, probably beginning by talking about it. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant. I mean, we tend to avert our gaze. We would rather be lulled into foolish and undeep visions of the future, visions of abundance or virtual hedonism or informational overload. But these are trivial and easily dealt with matters contrasted with the basic question which hovers over us at this point in our history, which is, what is it to be a human being, and how much worth is there in it? And if there is worth in it, then how can we act to preserve it? There's a lot of hand-wringing and worrying about the extinction of species on this planet. And yes, the gray parrot, the snail darter, the orangutan, they're all in great danger. But I've got news for you. None of them are as endangered as humanity is. And it's humanity that has its hand on the button. So it's a wake-up call, I think. Somebody asked me in the course of my being here, they said, it's harder for me to take psychedelics than it used to be. Do you think it's because I'm getting old? And I said, no, I don't think it's because you're getting old. I think it's because the world you're living in is becoming more dangerous. And if psychedelics mean consciousness expansion, you cannot take them without encountering what you might superficially define as a bad trip, meaning you feel bad, you have strange images of alienation, of tormented flesh, of machine penetration of the human world, so forth and so on. This is not a bad trip. This is the last warning you may have before these things are set in adamantine. Who is going to pull our chestnuts out of the fire if it is not us? And who are we pulling these chestnuts out of the fire for, if not for our children? And we do not want, I believe, our children to become unrecognizable to us. The continuity of life and being depends on there being a shared continuum, not only of flesh, but of hope and love and a sense of value projected onto nature and onto our relationships. Well, that's the party, folks. I know it wasn't much fun. I hope it was interesting. It felt useful. But whoever it was who was marveling over my depth of humor and command of comedy earlier in the evening, you can now meditate on this talk. Well enough with this sort of thing. Anyway, thank you very much. One more meeting, and it will be Thursday night here. Well, people always come late. I don't mind people coming late. What I really hate is the fact that I always start on time. There's not much I can do about it. It was said of Immanuel Kant, you could set your clock by him on his morning walk, which is the most powerful argument against Kantian idealism I've ever heard. Who cares what this guy thought? He had to stick up his ass. Of course, it was some time ago.
When did he live?
Oh, details. I don't know. When did he live? Sometime in the early 18th century, I think, middle 18th century. German idealism. He preceded Schopenhauer and came after Hegel. Is that right? In the absence of knowing whether that's right or not, I offer the factoid that Rudi Rucker is Hegel's great-grandson. A fact you learn from Rudi within 30 seconds of meeting him in most situations. What? Who is Rudi Rucker? If only he were here to hear you ask the question. Rudy Rucker is one of an expanding number of science fiction writers who are running harder than usual to stay in place, thanks to Greg Egan, who has raised the bar of science fiction higher than I thought it would rise before the close of the millennium. I don't know if I've directly pitched Greg Egan to you. I've mentioned him several times, but if you only bother to read one science fiction author a year, you might give this one a go. All of it's worthwhile. Permutation City is probably the most alarming and short-term enlightening. It's basically set 20 or 30 years in the future and works out the implications of something which we've discussed here, which is the possibility that might flow from being able to upload or download, as the case may be, yourself into a machine as digital code. And basically what Permutation City is a museum of all possible plots that might permit. You follow a number of people through a number of twists and turns. Well, this is the last of the staff-oriented evening get-togethers. I'm doing a weekend with Mark Pesce this weekend for the public. I've arranged for you to gaze upon Mark this evening. There he is. How often do you get to see the true dimensions of a real giant? Yes, and then after that's over with, I will go home Monday morning. Sometime shortly after 9, flight UA 41 will pull up off runway 29er at SFO, go wheels up, bank sharply left, and I'll fly west with the sun at my back. So, in my cannabis-clouded memory, I can barely reach back to the dim beginnings 13 days ago to what we actually went over and overwent in these meetings. But I'm relying on you to correct that problem. Is there anything anybody has on their mind, either derivative of what has been said, or feel free? Don't be shy. This is your last crack at me if I've arranged things the way I think I have.
Dennis, I woke up this morning and the evidence replaced all my things with exactly everything.
And how could you tell?
Just something's wrong with it.
You mean a slight existential discontinuity between you and reality? Well, I was just reading, I can't remember who it was, but somebody was the guy who wrote that book, Virtual Reality. I think that's all it's called. Not Reingold, whose name begins with an H. Is it Ein? M? Michael Hein. Yes, exactly. He mentions in there that after hours and hours in these simulated worlds, when you take off the goggles, there seems to be a strange film over ordinary reality, existential distancing. Who knows? Maybe just a knife edge of paranoia, because what the VR immersion establishes for you is things are definitely not what they appear. I don't know why this is such a hard point to drive home. You don't have to be Immanuel Kant to figure out that nothing is what it appears to be. One of the strange things about modern dialogue about the crack-up of consensus culture is we all know nothing is what it appears to be, and yet the most extraordinary claims and tales are granted a veracity that we don't even extend to what we're hearing across the breakfast table. And by that I mean alien abductions, melting ice caps, planetesimal bodies hurtling toward Earth. We live in a level of rumor, anticipation, myth, projection, paranoia that not only makes bedrock hard to find, it seems to cast doubt on the very concept itself. Everything seems mutable. To me, this means we're living in a kind of alchemical universe where the momentum of positivist matter has been replaced by magical stuff, which is part mind, part matter, part physics, part dream, and we make of this what we will. I had an extremely minor epiphany this morning, more like a speed bump than an epiphany. But I was realizing, one of the things that I bitch about in these meetings is this, what I called the balkanization of epistemology, meaning the breakdown of consensus reality. Everybody believes whatever they want to believe. In thinking about this morning, I sort of glimpsed a different take on it, which is, I, as well as many other people, have talked about how the only way out of the historical dilemma is back into some kind of atavistic tribal arrangement of society. I've called it the archaic revival. McLuhan called it the global village, electronic feudalism, so forth and so on. It's been called many different things. But I realized in thinking about it this morning, this process, which I have preached, anticipated, delineated, is the explanation for my own discomfort with the impossibility of achieving consensus. What's happening is everything is tribalizing, meaning fragmenting, and there is no overarching metaphor of unitary truth. Truth is basically now conferred by numerical consensus. Heaven's. I remember the weekend that the Heaven's Gate people made their exit. It was Easter weekend, and topic A in Christian America was, how could people believe something so absurd? And people asked themselves this question as they dressed for midnight mass and prepared for Easter egg hunts. So I think, what is absurd and what is creditable seems to have become a matter of democratic consensus, which is a very strange way to do intellectual business if you're out of an empirical tradition. However, it may be how business is done in the future. I think this thing that I'm lamenting actually brands me as somewhat retro. I think what I'm lamenting is the disappearance of the vanishing point. The discovery of perspective in the Renaissance created over what had previously been a jumble of what I guess you would call psychologically weighted space, was replaced with this idea of all points of view becoming tangential at a single point of view, which was the vanishing point. For us, it's hard to talk about this because we have integrated this into our worldview so thoroughly that we now believe it to actually be part of reality. It's very hard for us to imagine how the discovery of perspective could have been a breakthrough, since it seems to us given by, our perceptual apparatus. McLuhan wrote an essay, or one of his minor books, called Through the Vanishing Point. And the point that he was making there was that the new electronic media, and for McLuhan that didn't even mean virtual reality or the internet. And for him it meant television, movies, radio, the electric light, so forth and so on. But that all these forms of media propelled us through the vanishing point and into this electronically tribalized world of relativistic values, where those who shout the loudest garner the largest headlines, and people believe whatever they want and experience a state of high dudgeon if you suggest that this is not a reasonable way to build a worldview. But so, nevertheless, this is where we're going. This is where we are, actually. We are in this place. The future has arrived. The question is, have you arrived? Have you arrived? Have you arrived? Have I arrived? The future is here in the sense of a mysterious dimension of infinite depth that, as it is learned, it changes the person who is doing the learning. For example, I could spend all my time, every waking minute of my time, doing nothing but learning software and implementing various tools. I don't do that. Nobody does that. But to the degree that I am incompetent in a world where tools that would confer competency exist, my inadequacy is self-chosen. And I talk about all these things with more passion here than in most places, because at times I've seen Esalen as somewhat retro, in that it had a resistance to technology. And at other times I've seen it as a kind of island of sanity in all of that, because what it has throughout its history, and I'm now talking about Esalen, attempted to celebrate and make cogent is the body. I mean, if there is no longer a vanishing point that finds its nexus in the abstract idea of the coordinating eye, there is still, though for how much longer who can say, a kind of nexus of coordination in the body. And Whitehead made this point presciently clear back in the 30s in Process and Reality. Is this the answer to a question, or am I now giving the evening lecture? Nodding yes doesn't tell me which it is. This is the lecture. I'd rather answer a question. Is there one? Or an observation? I mean, how do you people relate to this? You are Californians, which means you have more feet in the technical domain than most people. But you are, except for those of you who snuck in under some special dictum or decree, a staff here. And so, how do you feel these contradictions as poignantly as I do? Or are you so one or the other that you don't even feel yourself on the horns of a dilemma? Well, you want to take a crack at that?
So pose the question again, Terence.
Well, how poignantly do people feel the dilemma between the obvious decorporealization of the body through electronic culture and the effort on the part of the many schools of human potential psychology that have grown up here to make the body the bottom line and the final arbiter of value? That's what I'm asking.
I don't see any reason not to immerse ourselves in both. I mean, I feel like I use communications technology, certainly as far as my hunger for information or to use the various facilities that it offers. But I still make it my business to be involved with bodies.
And at the interface between technology and body, there is something called the mind, which has been modeled variously throughout history and with greater intensity and variety in the 20th century. Do you image yourself clearly and unambiguously when you think of yourself as a mind? And do you coextensively map the idea of mind to the idea of conscious ego, or is it more complicated than that? Well, in other words, we know Freud had a notion of how the personality was constructed. Jung brought another vocabulary to bear. Are these meaningful vocabularies? Is there still a place for the id, the superego, the collective unconscious, Reichian notions of body armoring? We know that gender definition is flying apart. We know that multiple personality, maybe not disorder, is on the rise. How do all these symptoms of a shifting set of body-mind definitions parse with your own feeling about who you are and what you're doing? Or am I the only one who walks around scratching my head about this all the time? It may be my extreme alienation, yeah.
What I find interesting is where what was once our mind has been incorporated in what I experience is now extended. Like my boundaries have become much greater. So part of me, because it's my memory, is in the notepad that I have. That I find an interesting concept.
You mean that part of what was conventionally held in biology, although we don't want to get into a discussion of where memories really are, but let's assume conventionally they were part of the body-mind system. There's a technical cheat in the loop, and it binds time, and the effect of binding time is to dissolve boundaries. And are you comfortable with that? Right. I think it's not much articulated here. Probably because, this is on a Greek metaphor, this is a kind of Sparta. We're forever exercising in the nude and putting mud on ourselves and glorifying the body. But, I suppose we could then say Cupertino is a horrifyingly distorted version of Athens, where, Platonists hold sway, moving effortlessly in mental castles of their own construction. The Greek solution to this dilemma was constant warfare and political struggle between these two points of view. I'm not suggesting that we polish up our broadswords and march on Los Gatos with blood in our eye. In fact, I don't advocate anything at all. I just feel more and more intensely the poles of the dilemma. And as I talk to people, I realize this is more and more people's dilemma. They couch it in different terms. They deal with it on different levels of sophistication. People, who can talk for an hour with serious Luddite arguments against high technology, when closely questioned, turn out to have failed touch typing. And that's the real foundation of their technophobia, not all these high-flown excuses, which are being pushed. On the other hand, people who glorify the physical, if they are professional, in the sense of athletes or teachers or doctors of great reputation, find themselves more and more dependent on technical prosthesis to convey their message. I mean, we are the most sport-loving society perhaps ever in history, certainly in hundreds and hundreds of years. But for most of us, what that means is we watch televised sporting events. We watch Wimbledon, we watch the Olympics, we watch the Grand Prix. Vicarious physicality, if you indulge in it, gives you very little philosophical room to rail against virtual reality.
6 to 8 hours, 4 days a week, massaging people. 6 to 12 hours a week, yoga-ing and dancing people. And then I go home to a computer. And sometimes I don't want to wrap my brain around a computer after that. You know, I've been in a certain vibe all day, and to do what it takes to get into the computer is not something I want to do. And then other times, I'm perfectly willing to sit down and spend several hours. So I wouldn't want to have all of either. Is what I discovered.
What do you think makes the difference in your attitude?
Well, sometimes just the amount of physicality. You know, if I for 8 to 10 hours really been being physical, I don't want to go do anything else. I wouldn't want to do more physical work either.
Drugs are good. I mean, to the point of the 6-pack of beer, we're talking, you know, whatever your drugs are, whatever floats your boat. Yeah, well, I'm not a masseuse, I don't do that, but I do live in a place startlingly remote and wild that is 15 seconds walk from my 1 megabyte connection. So I can be surfing the internet and within 30 seconds walk away from it and be in a Hawaiian rainforest. I find that extremely liberating, but I can imagine, you know, I have neighbors who think I'm crazy for one half of the equation or the other. You know, they may differ. Am I living paradox, or am I melding contradiction into a coincidentia positorum, an alchemical union of opposites? That's what I would like to believe. Mark and I were talking today about the weird fact that a given era articulates a given ideal. For instance, the Renaissance magical hermeticists articulated a magical ideal that couldn't possibly be realized until their epistemological naivete was swept away by modern science. Then modern science could create longevity, vision at a distance, near telepathy, prosthesis, extension of memory, so forth and so on. But in the act of creating it, it undercut the spiritual impulse for it. All these things, once achieved, from the spiritual point of view, had a kind of ersatz quality. They're not quite real. And some of you may have experienced, as I have, you'll read a description of some marvelous material that confounds reality, like aerogels or something, you know, slightly denser than smoke, nearly weightless, can be milled like metal, so forth and so on. Sounds fascinating. Well, then when somebody hands you a cubic foot of aerogel, within 30 seconds, you have completely assimilated what it is as an object in the world, and you see, oh yes, it is everything I was told it is, and yet somehow the thing which excited me about imagining its existence has now been stripped from it by the act of confronting it. Most things are like that. I guess what I'm saying there is, who was it who said we don't sell bacon, we sell the sizzle? But bacon is sustenance, sizzle is flash. The only thing I've found, two things seem to exceed this equation. One is sex, and I hope I don't have to preach the merits of that to you. And the other is psychedelic drugs. And these two things seem weirder than advertised, more interesting than advertised. And God knows both are being constantly advertised at high volume all the time in very flashy terms. And yet each exceeds the marketer's ability to interest you in them. That's interesting. Death may be the third one, but I did death the other night. I think one of those is enough. Well, how do any of the rest of you feel about all of this? Do you come here to this evening to be with people who think like you do, or do you come to see how weird the tech heads are as they parade their strange conceptions before you? I don't know, because I don't grill you on where you come from this organization. Well, yeah, I think that's how most people operate with it. Most people have almost, Ward Cleaver type values and worlds that they move in very comfortably. Cyberspace, gene therapy, virtual reality, nanotechnology, interstellar travel, life extension. These things enliven the experience of reading the newspaper, but they don't come tangential to most people's lives. On the other hand, some people, the technical community that's creating these things, the cadres of media people who must understand and re-explain this stuff back to the general public, they breathe and eat this stuff. And some people, like myself, I guess, are ambivalent between it. Human beings have always existed sociologically and aesthetically and conventionally over a much broader spectrum of behaviors and attitudes than any other species we're familiar with. But that difference has undergone like a hyperinflationary explosion in the last 15 years. Largely because, there are so many reasons, gender redefinition, the rise of the internet, the emergence of the super rich, the emergence of the super poor, the emergence of the totally wired, the emergence of the totally disconnected, and also the awareness that the growing sophistication of propaganda, which makes all honest efforts to establish a level playing field of discourse easily subverted. I mean, every time you think you're having an honest discussion or making an honest appraisal of a situation, if you pull back one level, you discover you're embedded in other people's agendas and other people's and institutions' styles of manipulating reality. I mentioned to you Eric Davis's book. It hasn't come out yet, Technosis. When it does come out, I urge you to read it for all kinds of reasons. one I would mention here is that it showed me that everyone, including myself, and that was a big shock for me, is a creature of their time, and that it's very hard not to serve invisible agendas where you don't realize that you think the way you think for reasons entirely divorced from who you are, where you are, and what's good for you. For example, in the Middle Ages, Christian piety permeated every level of society and every act and every thought, even of the critics of Christian piety. It wasn't that there were people who stood apart from it. If you defined yourself by attacking it, you nevertheless were defined by it. I think I mentioned recently or somewhere or sometime that back when I was a student at Berkeley, once during a riot, people dropped a banner off a third floor dorm balcony that said, it was a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre, "We cannot transcend Marxism until we transcend the conditions that have created it." And in a way, we cannot transcend the social, political, and philosophical reality that we are now very uncomfortably situated in until we transcend the conditions that create it. But we are those conditions. The momentum of our ideologies is the main thing holding together the illusion of any coherency at all. I mean, the people who are really with it are really difficult to understand, and their effort to communicate is maddeningly unsuccessful, I think, for them and for us. The balkanization of discourse, the proliferation of special vocabularies, the generation of unstated professional assumptions, the we all know kind of sense of reality out of which then statements can be made, tends to island discourse. And yet, if discourse is islanded, community becomes nearly impossible. Well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. It seems to me, the conclusions that we've drawn from these meetings that we've had, which themselves have been plagued by this kind of fragmentation and dissipation. I mean, people have Feldenkrais things to do. They have processing to do. They have to meet their connection. They have something else to do that busts up their loyalty to even the idea of 6 consecutive meetings on the subject of chaos. Yes, no, we're living it, but the important thing is to realize that you're living it and that that's what it is. What I come away from all this with is that looking at the future, much of which is already in place. I mean, don't imagine that the world will look greatly different in 5 or 10 years. It may look slightly different. This world we're living in, the world of 1998, to the camera's eye, is indistinguishable from the world of 1990. And yet, the most elaborate and sophisticated technical artifact in the history of mankind has been put in place in those 8 years, the rise of the internet. But, who runs into it? Who stumbles over it? Who sees it? It's odorless, tasteless, invisible. We all had computers in 1990. It's simply that they were large paperweights. Now they have become telepathic creatures. And while we natter over the implications of all of this, they freely converse with each other in a planetary-wide environment and evolve themselves toward, whatever destiny lies in wait for the machine logos that we have pulled into existence. So, this future which is already here has implications that few of us have fully grokked, I think. And I listed 3 of them just as a crib to help me through this. First of all, that there is no closure. All ideology is now exposed as an adolescent response to being. If the 20th century taught us anything, it taught us the toxic nature of ideology. The excesses of the left led to the Holocaust. The excesses of the right led to the pogroms and mass trials of Stalinist Russia, the excesses of the Cultural Revolution in China, the suppression of dissent in many parts of the world. So there is a need to abandon ideology, which is really a postmodern position, and it's very uncomfortable. The absence of closure is a post-juvenile stance toward being that few people in the past ever lived long enough to grow comfortable with. If you died at age 40, culture as a con game lasts long enough to keep you entranced up until sometime in midlife. If you live beyond midlife and you still are fascinated and entranced by culture, chances are you're an idiot at some point. I mean, is this not obvious? After this is why, marketing has shrewdly understood this. This is why we are folded back toward the idolization of youth, because it's an idolization of cluelessness. It's not the firm body and the quick steps that the marketers are interested to sell you. It's innocence. But innocents are people you love to play poker with if you are sufficiently cynical. And believe me, the market forces are sufficiently cynical. So assimilating to the future means living not with no ideology whatsoever, or with and people say, well, can one live without ideologies? Isn't the belief we should strive for peace and justice and ideology? I don't think so. I think these are provisional models of behaviors that derive from immediate practical concerns that can be revised in real time, constantly held up to the incoming flow of data and adjusted. That's why the concept model is somewhat, if Lenin had said he had a model, if Hitler had said he had a model, I think it would have played out with a little more soft conclusions than to say, a new truth is proclaimed and the behaviors which derive from it are incontrovertible. So no ideological closure. And I don't know how you feel about this. I'm very comfortable with it. I was passionate about ideology in my youth. I've had most of them. At 11, I was reading Mein Kampf, and Festung Europa sound like a very good idea. I loved all that pseudo-Egyptian, overscale, tasteless architecture and all that stuff. Folk dancing and summer camping sounded attractive. At 17, I was a Marxist, ready to go to the barricades for the workers' state. At 22, we marched under the black flag of anarchy, used to bust up meetings of Trotskyites and write graffiti on their front doors and make life hell for those people. Now I don't give a shit, and I feel much better about it. Thank you. I think we should strive for a sane and caring world that gives as many people as much choice to express themselves as possible. Beyond that, I don't feel any kind of an imperative. Going along with this idea of living without ideology is the idea that there is no longer any consensus reality. And this one is maybe more important to me than to you, because as an intellectual with an agenda, an idea, a revelation, at times in my career it seemed to me that what I was supposed to do was convert everyone to my viewpoint. Of course, this is preposterous. Very few people are able to do that. No one is ever able to entirely succeed with that. Now I see that we all live in our own private Idaho, and all you can really do is ride the range and mend the fences, but you're not going to push the ranch out to both coastlines. And then how to view other people's realities. Well, I view it as private property, not to be violated by me. I'm a trespasser. If I go and sit with those who are visited by pro bono proctologists from nearby star systems, I feel I'm trespassing on someone else's turf. When I'm in the presence of people who insist on soy protein with every meal, I feel, I'm trespassing on someone else's turf. I'm an invited guest. I behave myself, and then I go home and scratch my head about the neighbors.